Hello, students. Obviously, today's class on women's writing. So, as yesterday we had discussed why women's writing is important for us in syllabus, and why need to we go through women's studies. So there were like some very interesting answers in the questions, and moving forward with those answers, and obviously like discussing some of the points here, some important points here. I'll be discussing about the history of women's writing or feminism. Why do we need to study feminism? And obviously, when we talk about feminism, then later you'll find that initially, obviously, it's just the basic thing that we'll be discussing, but later you'll find there's a distinction between the mainstream feminism and alternative feminism. And what is the basic difference between these two? I mean, the mainstream feminism and alternative feminism. Because when we talk about mainstream feminism as a general term identifies feminist ideologies and movement which do not fall into either the socialist or radical feminist camps. So the mainstream feminist movement traditionally focused on political and legal reforms, and as it roots in the first wave feminism, because obviously we had discussed this also yesterday, that there are three different waves of feminism. So, and in the historical liberal feminism of the 19th and the early 20th century, in 2017, Angela Davis referred to mainstream feminism as bourgeoisie feminism. So we'll be just discussing this later, but right now just see what is the history of feminism. So the term feminism can be used to describe a political, cultural, or economic movement aimed at establishing equal rights and legal protection for women. So, feminism involves political and sociological theories and philosophies concerned with issues of gender differences, as well as the movement that advocate gender equality for women and campaigns for women's right and interest. Although the term feminism and feminist did not gain widespread use until the 70s, they were already being used in the public parlance much earlier. For instance, in Catherine Hepburn's speaks of the feminist movement in 1942 film Woman of the Year. So obviously, talking about all this thing, then I will go into the detail of feminist movement. So if we talk about the history of feminism, with this can be divided into three waves. So the first wave of feminism started in 19th and early 20th century. So the second was in the 1960s and the 1970s, and the third extended from the 1990s to the present. So feminist theory emerged from this feminist movement. It is manifest in a variety of disciplines such as feminist geography, feminist history, and feminist literary criticism. So, feminism has altered predominant perspectives in a wide range of areas within Western society, ranging from culture to law. So, feminist activities have campaigned for women's legal right of contract, property rights, voting rights, and these are some of the things which we still face in our country. And obviously, we see that there are certain issues related to all these legal rights which is given to women. Though this thing has been more defined by now, but yes, like few decades back or like few years back, we used to find dispute regarding this rights, property rights, or the legal rights which were given to the women. Now, moving on to the next point, for women's right to be to bodily integrity and autonomy, for abortion rights, for reproductive rights. That means even if it is about abortion, it is about the right on her own body, she could not claim it. She had to depend on others. She has to depend on court. So including everything, including access to contraception and quality parental care also, she did not had the right to make a choice for herself. So this sounds like very very unrealistic, but this was the reality of the society if we talk about the society which was before 1950s, because we have come to the time, or we are living in a time that we hardly know about the struggle through which they have gone, the suffrage through which they have gone. So obviously we feel that these are like easy things. Obviously, do we need to ask for this choice? Yes, this is the biggest point which comes to our mind. But yes, these were the things. They did not even had, I mean, the right for the bodily integrity and autonomy. So that was the concern of the females. And obviously, when we talk about these issues with the girls of today, then obviously there's a big question mark in their mind that, do you think one has to struggle for this? One has to fight for this? Yes, it was it. Because they were not given all these rights then. Now, moving on to the next point. For protection of women and girls from domestic violence, which obviously we see even today. So, sexual harassment and rape. For workplace rights, including maternity leave and equal pay. Females did not used to get maternity leave, and they were not considered economically productive as men. So they were not paid equally, so they had to fight for that also. So obviously we see that it was not just like inequality in terms of the strength, because they used to people used to consider that females are physically weak as compared to men. So obviously they'll be less productive as compared to the men. So against misogyny, so a typical the mindset, the female mindset that used to prevail in the society, so they had to fight against that also, and against other forms of gender specific discrimination against women. So there are n number of discrimination that we can talk about or will be discussing later in the class. But yes, so these were the main points for which, or these were the main things which for which the females had to fight. Now, Truth's 1851 speech to American feminist women of other races have proposed alternative feminism. As I told you earlier, so there are distinctive concept and theories about feminism, mainstream feminism, alternative feminism. So obviously we'll discuss this further later in the next class. So this trend accelerated in 1960s with the civil rights movement in the United States and the collapse of European colonialism in Africa, the Caribbean, parts of Latin America, and Southeast Asia. So if we talk about history, then obviously Simone de Beauvoir wrote that the first time we see a woman take up her pen in defense of her sex was Catherine de Pizza, who wrote Eprit au Dieu Amour, Epistle to the God of Love, in 15th century, when for the first time female showed the courage to write for herself or for her own right. And here also she is not writing, Pizza is not writing a letter to anybody else, but she has written the letter to the God, Epistle to the God of Love. So this was in a way, as is said by Beauvoir, was the first defense about her sex or for her sex. So next is Arigappa and Forzi, who worked in the 16th century. So Mary Lazars, Bradstreet, Francois wrote during the 17th century. So next, coming on to this points, feminists and scholars have divided the movement's history into three waves. So I have I've discussed this thing briefly in the beginning also, and again here is the classification for these three different movements which were for this feminism. So first wave refers mainly to women's suffrage when they were suffering. Movement of the 19th and the early 20th century mainly concerned with women's right to vote. That means they were not even given the right to vote. So in France, if you talk about a country like France, which is one of the most developed countries of the world, they had given the right to vote to the women in 1919, as late as that. So the second wave refers to the ideas and actions associated with the women's liberation movement beginning in the 1960s, which campaigned for legal and social rights for women. So finally, the third wave refers to a continuation of a reaction to the perceived failure of second wave feminism beginning in the 1990s. So this is all for today's lecture. After this class, you are most welcome to jot down or just write your queries in the chat box, or you can just drop your questions or queries in the comment box here.